You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dmitri. I'm also the founder and CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, the marketing and PR firm that specializes in music innovation. You've probably noticed more music tech acquisitions in recent months. Some have been fire sales and some have been significant movers, changing hands for capitalization reasons. But overall, many have matured, and as these players consolidate, it could mean more for the music industry as a whole. To help me understand what's happening and what it means for our industry, I've got the sharp-minded Glen Peoples with me from Billboard magazine. Our conversation covers a lot, including the rise of rollups and acquisitions to build label services, the role of AI in the music tech investment landscape, and the cyclical nature of consolidation and its broader impacts on the future of the industry. I think you'll get a ton from this wide-ranging conversation on consolidation. But first, we've got the news headlines for you with Tristra and Jade with our weekly Rock, Paper Scanner.
Rock, Paper Scanner.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Music Tectonics for our weekly news roundup. I was going to say biannual news roundup, but that'd be a little bit extreme. Like, how in the world could you summarize all of the music industry's news just if you did it twice a year? That's a fool's errand. This is Tristra Yeager, the Chief Strategy Officer at Rock, Paper, Scissors, and today I have with me Jade.
Hi, how's it going, Tristra?
Hey, why don't you introduce yourself for the people out there?
Hi, yeah, Jade Preboy here. I am an onboarding specialist / new business manager / sales wizard here at Rock, Paper, Scissors.
You should see his sales spells. They're pretty intense.
They are enchanting.
They involve a lot of burning of Dogecoin. Okay, so this week there's a lot of interesting news stories, and I have a wide variety of things for y'all. Jade is here to help me expand and give some different perspectives on these stories. So from the fabulous, ever informative and wonderful Music Ally, there was a very interesting piece a few days ago about a new startup that is a haptic music startup called, and I'm going to butcher this, oMoo. What this company does is they've created an app that gives you tactile feedback to make music feelable, and that's in quotes. And it's all on your smartphone. So basically what it does is it translates the beat, flow, and texture of a song in real time, and it allows you to touch, they say, the full details of your favorite song on your phone. So this was originally a solution to deal with hearing loss, and there's a couple other products like that out there that allow people with either hearing challenges or loss feel the music with their bodies. But I found this really interesting that they were doing this on an iPhone as an app. And it also just sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. I've done some of this before.
Have
actually.
you?
Yeah. So have you ever put on a haptic vest?
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking about. I know some people provide those at stadiums and stuff like that for people with hearing loss.
Like a company called Subpack, like you put this on and it vibrates your whole core, essentially, with
Sounds
the bass
relaxing.
notes. Also, I was at CES a couple years back, and there was a way that you could interact with sound using air pressure.
Whoa.
And you would put your hand in and you would feel like a shape, but there was nothing there. Sound impacts air pressure, right?
Yeah.
So if you hold your cheek up to the iPhone speaker and someone's on a call, you will feel air pressure moving. So maybe they have found a way to magnify that.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just running on the phone and there's a separate device that it hooks into that provides more haptic feedback. This is super interesting to me. I think this space is going to heat up.
Yeah. I just saw recently, and this isn't necessarily a musical application, but using sound waves to create waves in water that could then be used to do something like, say, clean up an oil slick.
Yeah.
And or generate electricity even. So a lot of interesting potential for this crossover between sound and haptics. It's pretty cool. Now, of course, it's not a fun week unless you get to talk about David Israelite and the NMPA. And David gave a talk earlier last week, I believe. And of course, he had a lot of things to say about Spotify podcasts and how they're using music that publishers believe they should be compensated for. He's also concerned about PRO reform. But one of the most interesting things about this article in Billboard was just the breakdown of where publishing is still making money. Of course, there's a lot of variety now, and a lot of it feels fairly predictable. But one thing that I found notable was that 1% of publishing revenue is still coming from sheet music. It's like the thing that's so interesting about technological change is that all the technologies kind of stick around, right? Like you can still go online and buy a scythe, or I could buy some tack for my oxen.
I'm going to go play a vinyl record this evening.
Oh, with living dangerously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Amish 2.0 when you're into vinyl. But all of these technologies kind of stick around. And so sheet music is still maybe not a huge source of revenue, but it's still enough to take up a percentage point, at least according to what was reported in Billboard. So I thought that was really interesting and something for us to keep in mind, that even as we talk about this incredible pace of change, all the other tech is going to stick around for a while. Like we still do use MP3s, right? We still use vinyl records. There's still people recording onto magnetic tape. There's still, I don't know, piano rolls may be the only thing that come to mind that may not be in wide production and may not be purchased as much as they were once. Obviously not as much as they were back in the day. Okay.
The 1% pub rev coming from sheet music is awesome. I would actually expect that to be higher.
Yeah.
Sheet music's a huge part of live performing.
Yeah, especially in educational contexts.
Yeah. Bands, a lot of time. I mean, I haven't seen too many stand-up bass players fumbling around with an iPad on stage.
They got enough worries.
Yeah. It's usually flipping through sheet music.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. I don't know if fake books are a part of that. Every musician I know has fake books, which are chord progressions and sheet music. That's you fake along just the chord progressions.
And now you can AI generate sheet music and it'll be a deep fake book.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here all night, folks.
Yeah. Also, any arranging, live performance, playing with bandmates. That's all. I would expect 1% to be higher. I'm bullish on that. I think that's going to go up, actually.
Well, and with the love of analog that is arising in the passionate hearts of our Gen Z friends and Gen Alpha, I think we're definitely going to see more and more interest in analog music representation, not just physical objects to play recorded music, but maybe sheet music too. Yeah. All right, you heard it here first. We're predicting a sheet music revival. All righty. Now, this is super interesting. In Ars Technica this past week, I read about MCP, which, according to the headline, is the new, quote, USB-C for AI, unquote, that's bringing fierce rivals together. So it's interesting. It's a problem that once a technology matures to a certain place, and once there are enough players on the field, you start to get to this place where it's like, how are we going to get all of these things to work together? So OpenAI and Anthropic, among other players, are working to create a standard that would allow AI models to talk more fluidly and be connected more seamlessly and effortlessly with other software platforms like gaming engines, 3D modeling software, that kind of thing. And I think this is important because I think it shows a certain level of maturity in the AI market as it currently exists. And it also shows that like it ain't so easy. You can't just add AI. I think for those of us who are not working as developers, we can almost think about it as, can't you just plug that cord into that slot and voila, you can use this model to do X, Y, and Z. But clearly there are a lot of other technical challenges to be solved. And standards can help solve those problems, or at least prevent people from having to constantly reinvent the wheel in a variety of unnecessary ways.
I mean, we were going to upgrade to fiber internet. And I was really into it. I wanted fiber. But they had to run a new line, and I wasn't into that. So we just went back to cable. I could imagine a world that's built on this where we run new fiber lines or something like that. That's an AI hard pipe, essentially.
Yeah, we'll see if that happens. And I'm thinking, I don't know. There's some interesting questions here about that. We'll get to some of the interesting questions about AI in just a second. We'll come back to AI.
Yeah, have you read iRobot?
Not in a while. So this
doesn't end well. It ends well, but it doesn't go well.
Speaking of questionable ends, there was a really interesting piece in The Ankler called Eternal Celebrities, the Multi-Billion Opportunity is Coming. So what this piece covers is basically how celebrities' careers don't end with their physical death. Now that we have AI, holograms, etc., you can use a voice model to reproduce their voice. You can easily generate more, video scenes with an actor, for example, or a musician. And this is both exciting, but it's also a very bizarre business challenge. So estate management has been a thing for quite some time. I think going back to Elvis, we had a great episode on this actually about artists' estates and their sort of afterlife. If you want to go back, it was a Halloween episode, I think a year or two ago. But it's becoming more and more complicated because you can license someone's likeness and image to via AI and create new content, even if they have been deceased for years. So this is a challenge for the managers and lawyers of the world. And so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. It's poorly regulated to some extent, I would say. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like there's a lot of uncharted territory here about what's appropriate and how people would be remunerated for the use of the estate's assets in a way. And I think this is just a really interesting field. The other question that it begs is what's going to happen with all the new, still living talent that wants to get a piece of all this? What if Arnold Schwarzenegger just like dominates content for the next 50 years, even if he passes away? Like, I think that's kind of a problem.
I got two things to say about this. First of all, why did they have to make this image look like it's like the ghost of pop punk's past or something? Like, that's creepy, but okay, I'm here for it. Second, do you think people are going to care about Elvis in 50 years? Genuinely. Someone asked me this outside of the music world when they were asking me, this is a few years back, and someone was like, do you think people are going to care about Elvis? Because they had just visited Elvis, like
Graceland,
yes.
Yeah.
So you're yes.
I don't know. I think it's probably, the question is, it depends. So the one thing that Elvis's estate did really well, and there's been a great book written about this, and it's actually, we covered it in our episode as well, is that they managed his IP with such savvy that they kept him relevant. So some estates will be able to pull that off. And I think some estates will fail. Just if you look at the past with, say, poets or writers, if you had a really hardworking friend who loved a poet, sometimes they would edit their work and get it out there and republish it and publish it in collections and basically act as an impresario for this deceased poet's work. And I think we're going to see something like that, but magnified and across media and with AI, so that it's no longer just like reprinting someone's masterpiece, but generating new content around it, or another masterpiece possibly, if someone lucked out and did a really good job.
Yeah, you got my wheels turning. And shout out to all those folks that are adjacent to the artist that keep it alive and make it possible.
Yeah, there's unsung heroes.
There's a local story of a guy in town who was just a prolific printmaker. And he had a warehouse and house full of prints. And some of them got flooded and lost. And there was another person in town who was like his champion and still works to this day to preserve what he was making, which is...
Yeah, and that's also why you can have huge icons from the past that completely fade out of public memory and sometimes even out of history and just end up in little footnotes. Last but definitely not least, Adweek had an interesting piece recently, which is called "Trump's Tariffs Will Make AI Costs Soar, but Adoption Won't Slow." So this kind of baffled me a little bit. And again, I would love not the tariffs making things more expensive. I think it's pretty clear how that would happen. But the fact that adoption still wouldn't slow, I have a question about that. I think that's an interesting conclusion that the piece comes to from talking to various experts around the ad space in particular. But when you look at something like Pew's research, which they released recently, now, albeit this is from 2024, so things are changing pretty rapidly, but only about 10% of U.S. workers who had access to AI or used AI, used it regularly and found it really helpful in their work. The rest of folks either kind of had tried it and were like, meh, it didn't really do anything for me. It didn't really help my job. Or maybe even, what is AI? Or A1, as some people call it.
I'm going to start calling it that.
Yeah. Who doesn't want a technology that can generate music that sounds just like Foreigner and is great on a hamburger?
Yeah.
So what this to me says is that we're in this, there seems to be this kind of truism that AI, and a lot of CEOs are actually pushing this in a bunch of different industries, that their workers need to adopt AI. If they don't, they're going to be fired in some cases, depends on how harsh the CEO and his memo are. But there's also this true like a pretty big question mark on the part of workers about how useful it is. If the adoption is coming from the top down, which is what is happening to some extent in some industries, I have questions about what the impact of cost is going to be versus folks that are working from the bottom up, like a lot of people in the creative industries or in coding or engineering. You were mentioning, Jade, you said you had some friends that found generative AI extremely helpful in their studies.
Yeah, as much as I hate it, I happen to agree with this. Trump's tariffs will make AI costs soar, but adoption won't slow. I think that the people that are the power users using it are not going to go away from using it, even if it's a small group. I also think there's some other interesting things around economics here. Some questions we don't have to answer today, but would be, how much would you pay for a turkey on Thanksgiving Day?
That's true.
$75? $150? Would you pay $215 for a turkey?
And do you have a turkey you're trying to unload on me here?
No, I just think that on Thanksgiving Day, if I have plans to make Thanksgiving food or whatever, and the expectation is that I should get a turkey, I'm going to go to the store and get it no matter what.
Yeah, same thing with Christmas trees. However, I'm not going to go and buy a turkey on April 11th. For $200 just because I feel like having a turkey, right?
No.
So I think that's a good point. The places where AI is truly the most useful, I mean, in some ways, this could help suss out exactly where AI actually has the most value for workers.
Yeah. You could look at iPhones too. I mean, the new iPhones have AI on device.
Oh boy.
Like, how much do you use an iPhone?
Yes, I do use an iPhone, but I get old secondhand iPhones because that's how I roll. That's how I roll.
Bless you. The older the iPhone you have, and it's still working, the cooler you are in my book.
Wow.
If you still have an iPhone 4 and you're making it work, you are the coolest person.
My problem is I keep dropping them on the pavement as I run. They don't like that. Just note to everybody, don't throw your iPhone down on the street as you're running as fast as you can.
Did you hear that Apple supposedly flew in 3 737s full of iPhones 2 days ago?
Yeah, I did read about that. So that was hilarious. It's just
funny.
Airlifting all these little mirror babies into the U.S. as fast as possible. Jade, this has been a really fun news romp with you this week.
Thank you, Tristro.
All right.
Likewise.
Now for our feature interview.
Glen Peoples has covered the business side of music for Billboard for over a dozen years. He focuses on financial topics, closely covers public companies' earning reports, and pores over annual reports and other financial disclosures. He also covers startups and new technologies, catalog acquisitions, global trends, the streaming business, and market research in the music business. As the number of publicly traded music companies exploded, Glen created the Billboard Global Music Index that measures the value of 20 publicly listed music companies. He founded The Ledger, a weekly newsletter that focuses on financial and economic topics in the music business. And along with Jay Gilbert of Your Morning Coffee, Glen also co-hosts Behind the Setlist, a podcast that interviews musicians from Shania Twain to Daryl Hall about their concerts, songs, and their thoughts on aspects of the business. Glen is currently based in Los Angeles, but has also lived and worked in New York and Nashville, all the music cities. Hey, Glen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I haven't lived in Miami, the other music city.
That's a good one, too. Then there's New Orleans, there's Austin, there's here, Portland.
There are many, but the 3 main ones, let's say.
3 biggies.
I've been
3
there.
biggies. Well, I'm excited to have you here. It's been a while since you and I have caught up. I've been following you for longer than I think you were at Billboard. You used to have a newsletter even before that, I believe, when you were in Nashville. And I've always appreciated how you have a special lens that you're looking out across the music industry and music tech. And so I'm excited about your perspective. And there's some stuff going on in the music industry right now that I think needs a kind of let's pump the brakes a little and talk about what's going on. What signs do you see, Glen, that consolidation is happening in music and music tech specifically?
There are definitely signs everywhere. I would say the consolidation is not in music tech per se, and it depends on how you want to define tech.
Right.
If you want a very expansive definition of music and technology, then yeah, it's everywhere. But I think the main consolidation right now is with companies building out their label services, label ownership, and taking a more global position So you see a lot of major labels and a lot of companies expanding to emerging markets, companies expanding their label services. We're at a time when labels are not only owning their recorded masters, artists can, as I'm sure that you've had on here many times talking to people about the impact of social media and TikTok, artists don't need labels as much as they used to. They can certainly go with a label if they want, and if they want to be a global star, that's probably the best way to go. But there are a lot of options, and I think everybody, the majors, everybody sees that there's going to be less ownership of the majors and record labels, and more administration, more distribution, as there are more and more artists who want to get in on what few streaming royalties are out there for them. So there's a lot of roll-ups, a lot of acquisitions that are allowing companies to expand their services businesses and expand globally as well. That's where the growth is. The growth is not in the United States and some other really mature markets. If you want high growth, you need to be in markets that are relatively low revenue right now in North Africa and Asia especially. But that's where the high growth is, and that's where the streaming growth and subscription growth is going to be. And as these markets become more valuable, there will just be a bigger group of creators there to work with.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. When we talk about science and consolidation, are there particular kind of roll-ups that were notable for you to say, oh yeah, this is what's happening?
Downtown, which was acquired by Universal recently, was rolled up a bunch of different companies. Song Trader is doing the same right now, based around sync and rights. But I think there will always be companies that go out and raise money and put together a roll-up just to take all these startups that are out there and put them together and try to create more value together than they can create independently. I think Downtown is especially a good example because I think they kind of proved their worth when they were acquired by Universal. They had the right idea. If you have the right idea with a roll-up, yeah, you're going to get acquired. That's the goal, to make your money back. Song Trader, which does music licensing, is putting together a bunch of companies, and there's just so much opportunity in music licensing right now. Look at YouTube. YouTube is the biggest media platform in the world by advertising revenue, and in the US, YouTube has the TV viewing time of, I think they're above Netflix now. That's a lot of user-generated content. That's a lot of content that needs to license music. They need simple solutions. They might have some generative AI solutions somewhere down the road. That's a group of people who wants to license music and needs something. So I think music licensing has definitely come a long way. And as there's more creations online, YouTube and social media, there's just more opportunity to license music. I think in a lot of ways, I don't think I'm a typical consumer, like in music. I can't compare myself. I don't think anybody who works in music is a typical music consumer. You can't compare yourself to others and say, this is what I do, so this is what the average American does. And I think I'm pretty average when it comes to YouTube. And I've watched a lot of YouTube, and it's replaced TV viewing time for me. And I think that's pretty typical of Americans of any age right now. And it's just a huge opportunity in music to license music to them.
In the first 7 minutes of this conversation, I think you laid out two big trends around why these consolidations or these mergers and acquisitions have value. The one, you mentioned the kind of the roll-up of label services or product services. I don't even know if they're not labels that are involved. I don't know if they're label services, but this transformation of what it means to be a distributor and what it means to be an artist without a record label as kind of justification. Downtown saw that coming when they wrapped up all these companies and then saw the value that there would be to something like a major record label that would want more of that part of the market. And now you're talking about the synchronization and other licensing that Song Trader specializes in, justifying growth there because there's going to be more and more need for licensing. So that's pretty cool how you mentioned those two, but you also painted the picture. That's what I think the Glen Peoples does, is sees what those bigger market possibilities are as a way to explain what's happening in the market. And another thing that's happening, consolidation is something that seems to happen cyclically in all kinds of verticals, all kinds of markets. And I'm curious, what does it say about the state of the music industry that we're in that cycle right now?
I think it says that the industry's in a transformation period, that it's easier to buy than build, and it's faster to buy than build in most cases. When you look at where the industry is now, I think it was predictable many years ago, but for companies to start building internally all the services and all the products they would need to get to the point where they are today, I think usually they buy these companies rather than build them. And when you're a major music company, you tend to buy your way to growth. And it's always been that way. They're always buying independent labels. That's where the real innovation tends to come from. Over the years, over the decades, majors buy smaller labels and add them to the conglomerate. Now they're at a point where the growth is coming internationally. The growth is coming from services, not being a quote unquote traditional record label, right? It's hard to see. Traditional record labels really doesn't mean much anymore, does it? They do so many different things in so many different ways. But the consolidation just says there's opportunity there. They didn't build for it in the past, and so now they're buying their way to it.
Interesting. What do you think this wave of mergers and acquisitions will do to affect the larger music industry? I mean, you've talked about the justification for this need for these new types of services, or these increased needs that built out these startups or rolled up these startups that then get bought by bigger and bigger companies. But how do you think the music industry is going to be affected by these roll-ups and these mergers?
That's a very good question. I think the one aspect that many people are most concerned about is the loss of independent ownership, and how that plays out in a practical sense. It's hard to say. I can't say that. But I think there's a large portion of the music business that does not want their business, or does not want the industry to be held in such a concentrated way, and they want more diversity. They don't want three companies owning such a huge share of label ownership and distribution, which is the situation we have now. And it's more fragmented in publishing, but it's still a small handful of companies represent the majority of publishing activity. So people tend to want more diversity and tend to distrust large, powerful companies. And I think that goes well beyond music, right? Nobody wants a monopoly. Nobody wants a duopoly. People want options. And if you don't want to go through a major music company, you just don't have as many options as you used to. From a practical sense, what difference does it make? I don't know. It's hard to say. I think that there's some downstream effects maybe in licensing. But then again, the majors tend to get better rates than the indies. And so if you're just concerned about your royalty rate, then be involved with a major, not an indie. I think the consolidation is ultimately a good sign. It means that there's money being pumped in to acquire companies, to roll them up, to invest in them, and to build out the ideas that the founders originally had. And, most startups are built to be acquired. They're not built to run standalone forever. And so when there are acquisitions, when there's consolidations, I think it's the market working very well. You want these companies to be acquired, and the founders move on, and then you integrate that company or that product, and you get as much value out of it as you can. Yeah, I think consolidation ultimately is pretty good. In the past, you can look at different waves of music business history where consolidation was there as a necessity. In the 2000s, labels were consolidating, distributors consolidated, just because business was shrinking. And so you wanted to consolidate, you wanted to eliminate as much back office redundant expense as you could. And that's how the labels got through the lean years. So consolidation means different things at different times, I think. And now with the business growing, it's certainly better than it was in the past. Consolidation was an ugly after effect of piracy and the download revolution and the migration to streaming, which has overall revenues really shrunk over 15 years, and they've been growing for about 10.
So there were different moments of consolidation for different reasons. In a way, in some cases, people were picking up the assets of a failed industry and now they're leveraging technology or synergies in a successful industry.
It's a very successful industry. It's a good thing that there's money coming into startups. There's money coming into fund companies to acquire and roll up startups. That's all good and healthy, I think. And it certainly was not that in the past. And yeah, I think back to Sony BMG merging. I think back to all the labels that merged, and there were a lot of layoffs. That's the thing about consolidation that I should point out. The downside of consolidation is somebody's always going to get laid off. And even in the good times, like now, when a company acquires another company, they're not going to keep everybody on board. So that's one downside of it. But I think consolidation is certainly much better when the market's growing than when it's shrinking.
Seems a little bit of what you're saying is consolidation is a inevitable outcome in certain cycles for a variety of industries and verticals. And sometimes it's under dire circumstances. Sometimes it's under better circumstances. So at least now it's possibly under better circumstances, not for the people that get laid off necessarily, but for the market as a whole, for the industry.
Yeah, I think as long as there are ambitious people in finance, ambitious entrepreneurs, you're going to have consolidation of some sort. Now, some is more impactful than others. When you have Ticketmaster and Live Nation merging, that's a really impactful consolidation that might not pass muster right now with regulators. Actually, in the Trump administration, they probably let it through. Biden, probably not. So these waves of consolidation also determined by who's sitting in the White House and what their opinion on market consolidation is. It seems like U.S. regulators found it hard to say no to a lot of consolidation over the years until the Biden administration took a different stance. We'll see how it turns out with Trump, but I don't see it continuing like it was for the previous 4 years.
Yeah. All right. We have to take a quick break, and when we come back, let's get into the investment side of the market. We'll be right back.
What makes news in music tech? Find out at our next Seismic Activity online event taking place April 23rd at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UK time. We'll be joined by expert journalists to go behind the scenes to understand how journalists and editors work, what gets their attention, and what happens next. Head on over to musictectonics.com/online events to register now and learn more about our free monthly online event series.
Okay, we're back. Glen, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the music tech investment side. I know you don't focus specifically on this, but you do have this broader market view in your coverage at Billboard. What's the trajectory of the music tech investment market the rest of this year, 2025, and into 2026? What's your spidey sense telling you, or what observations do you have about what investment we'll see in music tech in terms of quantity and quality?
I must say that Kristen Robinson at Billboard covers tech, and especially where the money's going in AI, a lot better than I do. So when you say music tech investments, I think AI, and I think that's where a lot of the money is going. I think there's an opportunity in AI and elsewhere. Let's talk about AI. There's going to be AI in music creation. There's going to be AI that helps creators create music, AI in digital audio workstations. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think that's going to continue for years to come. What I hear from people is that AI can help, and not just AI, but there's a lot of opportunity to help music rights owners do their work more efficiently and cost effectively. And that we're now entering a period where, and I wrote about this last week, where just more basic fundamental blocking and tackling is going to be important for rights owners. The days, especially in the US, of double-digit streaming growth are over, and rights owners can get a lot of value out of their catalogs by doing things more efficiently. So how the rights are managed, there's matching, there's sync, there's so many areas where technology and AI can help companies work more efficiently. You cut expenses, and that increases the value of your catalog, just as generating more revenue would. You can either make a buck or save a buck. And so I think in a lot of instances, there's going to be opportunities and a great need to save a buck. And it's really the unsexy stuff and the back office stuff a lot of the times, but that's where a lot of startups operate because there's a need for this kind of stuff. There's a need to help companies work more efficiently.
Yeah, sure. As more revenue streams have opened up, there's more work for people to do. And so over time, the back office has grown quite a bit for a lot of rights holding music and IP companies and artists and managers as well. There's a lot to do. So I could see where at some point you say all these tools have created these distribution and licensing and monetization opportunities, but it's also created more work. So then other tools come in to help you accomplish all that work, I think is what you're getting at.
Yes. Last time I was in downtown LA a few weeks ago, I saw these little igloo-sized robots delivering food around. And I thought, those are very cool. Somebody's out of a job. But that's something to be said about doing work more efficiently. And it's the same with music rights administration and just getting value out of a catalog. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of expense to be saved. I don't know if it's going to necessarily put anybody out of work. Hopefully it'll allow them to work better, more efficiently, and get more done.
I guess the question is what you do next. If you're done looking through spreadsheets, because now machines do it for you, what are you going to do after you're done looking through spreadsheets? That's always the question, right? Somebody is going to get put out of work. The question is whether that person will grab another role in something that's less tedious, something that only humans can do.
Yeah, it is. As the music business is growing, I think it's a better time to get laid off. Ultimately, it's never a good time, but it was worse to get laid off 15 years ago. And
yeah,
I know a lot of people that I used to work with are out of music, and kind of jobs shrivel up, and there are new openings, but not everybody's suited for those. And so there are a lot of people who used to work in music who are doing other stuff, and they might still want to be in music if they had their choice. So if you're going to get laid off at any time and be replaced by some kind of automation, it seems like now might be a better time than the previous wave of consolidation we talked about.
That's a hopeful spin. I haven't heard yet, Glenn. So thanks for that. It's interesting. You're talking about some of the kind of innovation, but also efficiencies that come with innovation. How will the continued maturity of music streaming affect innovation and new ideas in the coming years? What do you think is going to happen next as music streaming matures as the primary revenue driver in the music industry?
Well, I know that, this is no secret that music royalties or streaming royalties are not adequate for a lot of artists. That people always want to supplement streaming with something else. And that could be touring. And touring is not, from what I can see and what Billboard has reported, not as profitable as it used to be for all but the top artists. Touring is an expensive proposition. Where else do you go to make money? And now the big talk is about superfans and superfan platforms, and I guess ultimately some kind of place where you build communities, where there's some kind of customer relations management type of offering. So I think that, how that shakes out has yet to be seen, and what's successful and what's not successful. We'll find out over the coming years. But I think there's some money going there, and there's a lot of interest there because streaming for a lot of people is not enough money. They want more. They want to get more out of every relationship they have. And I think it makes sense intuitively that you want to get as much value as you can out of each fan as you can. And maybe you don't want to have to hit the road for 12 months with the cost of buses and gas today what they are. Maybe there's a better way to do it. And Weverse, which is owned by Hybe, mainly K-pop, but it's also used by a lot of other artists outside of K-pop. I think that's a template. It is a place where fans gather. They buy digital goods. They buy live streams. They buy merchandise. And I've never been comfortable thinking that, yes, the future is selling more T-shirts or selling more vinyl. And that's, I think, when superfans are mentioned, the superfan economy, it's selling more overpriced vinyl. I don't know if that's a good strategy. I think there's got to be some different, better ways to get value out of your fan base. So that's a priority because there's a demand for it. The problem is that there has to be platforms good enough that the consumers want to use. One thing I've noticed over the years is the best startups always put the consumer first, and they don't put rights holders first. Think of what Spotify would have been if they built something like the rights owners did with their early streaming services. The early streaming services didn't have the consumer in mind. Spotify worked because they have the consumer in mind, and they built a really good product that people wanted to use. So launching products just because rights owners and artists want it doesn't mean anything if you can't create something that consumers want to use. So that'll be the big test.
Let me ask you one more thing. This has been great. There's, like I said, there's only one Glen Peoples lens to look through. And this is, I think you really do add something from your analytical approach to the larger market. But I want to ask you one more thing before we wrap up. Are there any other segments of music tech that you're keeping an eye on, and why would those be?
I wouldn't say I keep an eye on it, but I think I have very limited insight into hardware. But there's always so much innovation in music hardware. And I did a podcast and we interviewed Howard Jones recently, and he was talking about a new contraption that he used for his album. And there's always new technology that artists can use, and that pushes music forward and allows them to be creative in new ways. And it's not something that Billboard covers much. It's something I pay a little bit of attention to. It's not like I hang out at NAMM every year and see what new instruments are out there. But I know that there's always new instruments that are pushing creativity, and I think that's great. I think it's probably a lot more difficult to get funding for a hardware company than a software company. So that's the downside of if we're talking about startups and who gets funding, who doesn't. I spend most of my time looking at more the financial side than the tech startups that are getting money. I do talk to startups. We do report on who's getting funding and who's getting acquired. More of my focus goes on what typically the bigger companies are doing, and I follow publicly traded companies really closely. And they're incredibly active and growing and acquiring, and it's a really interesting time of transformation. So if we're talking about funding, I tend to pay more attention to the companies that get a few $100 million in securitization funding than the startup who gets a few million. And there's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of securitization. There's a lot of big dollars changing hands, going into music catalogs, going into music companies. It's a pretty exciting time. There's a lot going on.
And it's interesting what you've done with the Billboard Global Music Index to actually track the increased number of publicly listed music companies. When you started that, it does not seem like there's music IPOs every day now, though. It seems like there was a phase of that. Will we see more coming down the road?
Yeah, that's a good question. Songtradr was looking into an IPO this year. I think it was reported last year. The trend, I think, has been more companies going private than going public. There was a big spurt a few years ago. That's when Warner went public. That's when Universal went public. Some companies went public through SPACs, Reservoir Media, and Deezer. There certainly has been a slowdown. StubHub has filed for an IPO. I wouldn't put that StubHub exactly in the music category. I don't even think the filing said how much music they sell, how much music represents of their business compared to sports or other events. If you want to be generous, let's call StubHub a music company. So there's one. Endeavor went public a few years ago, just went private. Believe went public a few years ago, went private last year. So I think going private is more common these days, but there's still a lot more public music companies than there were 10 years ago. Spotify hasn't even been a public company for 10 years, and there's just been so many more that followed that. So I think there will be more opportunities to add companies to that index. I think the index I just created that just to help people follow the increasing number of public music companies because there had been so many in just a short period of time. And I think I could add Avex in Japan, for example, to the list. Might be one I should add. That's a public company. But I think I'll be taking off some over time too. Hypnosis went private. Roundhill went private. So yeah, it's been shrinking. And I think IPOs are not as common as they used to be. I think that was just a period of time where everybody was excited about streaming growth and Wall Street was taking notice, and not a period of time we're going to replicate, I think, anytime soon. So that's why you saw so many IPOs.
Interesting. Glen, this has been great. I know I pushed you on some music tech questions, and you've referred us to Kristen Robinson, who we'll have to have on the podcast. She's a great Billboard writer. Definitely follow everything she writes as well. But again, really appreciate your perspective on things, looking at the larger market, and you've been doing it for a while. It's really helpful to have your kind of analysis of the impact of consolidation as where the larger market's going over time. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know we do free monthly online events that you, our lovely podcast listeners, can join? Find out more at musictectonics.com. And while you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference and sign up for our newsletter to get updates. Everything we do explores the seismic shifts that shake up music and technology, the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. Connect with me, Dmitri Vitsa, if you can spell it. We'll be back again next week, if not sooner.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.